G'day, Hugh here from videsign.com.au, a design company based on the Gold Coast in Australia. Thank you for joining me. Well, today is a little bit gloomy and a little bit rainy, so I thought I might have a look at using Aurora HDR and Photoshop to create a bit of a gloomy, grungy looking photo. So it's quite fun to do. We'll add a little bit of rain, much like what's going on outside, and really transform this photo. So let's hop into these programs and get going. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is open Aurora HDR and open the images we're going to create a HDR image from, which I have here, which was taken inside an abandoned factory in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales. So we have the three different exposures, under, the normal and the over. And we can click on alignment. We shouldn't need to in this case, but we'll click it anyway, and we'll click create HDR and let it do its thing. Okay, and that's done. So what we have here is our image that it's created for us in the HDR look, but we can apply a preset to it. And I'm going to go to dramatic because we want this to be a fairly dramatic photo, and we have our options here of what we could create a more dramatic look. So there's some really good filters that we can do, some presets we can use. I think I may go with something like Gloomy Day, which is nicely understated, and maybe just bring the highlights down a bit and open up the shadows there. HDR enhance it all the way, and I quite like that. We can do a bit of work in Photoshop later on, but to begin with, this is a good image that we can use. So we come up here to export, and we export the image. Go to browse. This is the folder I'm going to be using. We'll call it factory. Say save. Make it the highest quality, and export. And that's Aurora HDR's magic for us, done very quickly, and it creates a good base photo that we can hop into Photoshop and stylize to a degree. So once that's exported, which it has now, we can open to Photoshop and open that file up, which is called factory, and we open. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new layer. We're going to make sure our foreground is black, use the paint bucket and create a black image on this new layer above our background image. Come up to filter, noise, and we will go add noise. And we want it to be 400% Gaussian monochromatic. So make sure you have those settings. Now we want to add a blur to it, so we go filter, blur, Gaussian blur, make it around 2 pixels, and say OK. Now it doesn't look like rain at the moment. That's what the look we're going for, is rain. So what we do is we come up to image, adjustments and levels, and we want to bring the left hand one to around about 140, close to it, and the right hand side one we want to be around 160. So now we've got stars, which will turn into rain. So we have that. So we could say OK to that. Now what we want what we want to do with this is actually turn it so it is looking like rain. Now we can do that by adding a motion blur. So we can come to filter, blur, motion blur. Now I've got it set to 62% angle, or 62 degrees angle, which means it's coming down left to right. If we switch the angle around, we could make it come in the opposite direction, that way, or straight down, or if it's really windy, really flying in. I might make it around that sort of angle, but not too angular. So we'll keep it at that, pixels at 65. So we have that rain coming in from the side. So what we'll do now is we'll just change that to lighten. Sorry, we'll change it to screen. Okay, so we have the rain coming into our picture now, which we didn't have before. Now you can see it's stronger at the top and at the bottom. So what we'll do is we'll just go Control T and we'll make that 105%. Make sure you maintain the aspect ratio and say yes to that, and that will get rid of the problems at the top and the bottom of the photo. Okay, so what we can do now is we can just brighten up this rain a little bit because it's a little bit too subtle at the moment. So if we come up into the adjustments and levels, and what we can do then is just bring the highlight slider across and work out how bright we would like that rain to be. So somewhere around there looks good. So okay to that. Alright, so now that we've added a little bit of rain, we need to maybe warm it up a little bit because it is white. So we come to Image, Adjustments, Hue and Saturation. Make sure Colorize is selected and choose a hue that's sort of not as white, but we don't want it to be brightly yellow. So we can change the brightness of that yellow by increasing or decreasing the saturation. So we want to warm it up a bit so it's not bright white, somewhere along the lines of that. Okay, very good. Now what we want to do is we want to duplicate this layer. So we drag it down to the new layer button so that we have two. And what we want to do now is go Control T to this new layer to transform it. And what we're going to do this time is make it 200. Keep the aspect ratio and click yes. Tick the tick button. So that's really now given us a bit more of a heavier look. And now if we want to go to blur, Gaussian blur of 10 pixels to give ourselves a bit of a rainy look. Okay, so now we want to come down to our original layer and add a mask. And what we want to do with this layer is remove some of the rain from areas that we would like to see it not as strong. So make sure we have black selected here and a brush selected. We'll make the opacity of around 50%. And say with the handle there, we want to get a little bit of clarity in that. Maybe on some of these beams. And just different spots that you might want to work on. That's entirely a personal choice. But, yeah, I like to, where it's a bit more sheltered, move the rain a little bit. Like so. So that gives us a bit of a control over that. So we can always switch it back to white if we thought, oh geez, I'd like that to be back more there. And it will bring it back undestructively because we're using a layer mask. Okay, so once we're happy with those changes, what I would probably like to do next is then work on this floor to really give this starting to get a really cool look. Now before I do that, I'm going to do a couple other things on the base image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new layer and push that up to the top and have my brush selected, switch it across to white. And what I'm going to do with that is keep it at around 30%, brush size reasonable size. I'm going to paint a white glow over this beam of light that's coming in and the spill of light that's coming in through the side there. Make sure we have that layer selected when we do this. That's important. Now what we want to do is we want to come into Hue and Saturation, Colorize, and we want it to be bluer. So we really want to blue up what we've just brought in. So we can do that subtly, but enough to really create a bit of atmosphere in the photo, so we don't have sharp white light. We do that by playing around. So we choose a hue that we're happy with. Kind of like a bit of a deeper blue. The saturation will determine how much that blue is, and then the lightness will, well, obviously where we've brushed will become darker the darker we make that, and we want to darken that up just a bit. Okay, so now we've done that, we want to come down to our background image, and actually work on some of the contrast of it. So really up the contrast, and increase the brightness of it too, so it's not looking too dull. Alright, so this is really starting to come along now when you think of our original image that we brought into Aurora, the work we did in Aurora, and now where it is in Photoshop. But we're not finished yet. What we'll do now is we'll come up to File, and we'll go Open, and I have this puddle image that I want to work with. So what we can do is we can grab the Move tool and drag that image across to the one we're working on, and have it at the bottom, just above the background layer. Now we're not going to need the top half of this image, but what we need to do is just transform it so that it's taking up pretty much the whole of our image. And with that selected, we can choose the rectangular marquee tool and just basically block out an area that we're not going to be using, and hit delete. Control D to unselect, and now we have an image to work with. Now if we play around with the blending modes of this as well, and if we were to change it to screen, you can see it sort of blends in with our image below. Now we can also adjust opacity according to what our needs are. Now I'm going to keep that up at 100%, and I'm going to put a mask on it, and I'm going to grab a brush, make sure black is selected, and I'm going to make this around 66%, so it's really going to come off the image, and we're going to remove it from the sharp edges that we have from cutting out the area of the photo that we weren't going to use. Now you can see that this puddle photo I'm using has a bit of a line in it, so what we can do is we can select our image and move that so it actually does look like the reflection of the post there, which is quite handy to do. And then we can come back to our brush here. Don't do that, so we go Control Z to undo, make sure we have our mask selected when we do that, always have that selected, and then we can just see that looks pretty good as is, so I'll undo that, and coming back to here, I'm getting a little bit like I need it to be perfect, so I'd like that to be in pretty good line with the post there. Come back to our mask, come back to our brush, and let's focus on any areas then that don't look right, as in reflected windows, but we can leave a bit of green on this door to really add a bit of texture. Okay, so we've added this grungy element in. We can play around with this layer. We could work on the exposure and really grunge it up a lot by playing around with that, which gives us a really unique look, and which we didn't have in the photo before. So to see how it's looked before and after, we can just unclick it. Now it's quite obvious when you unclick it that it's in there, but when you look at it as total of the photo, you wouldn't ever know. So I'd probably look at adjusting the contrast in here as well to get it really contrasting. Don't brighten it up too much, just a bit here and there. Now we have it at 100% opacity. Okay, so now what, well, for a start, I don't like this up here, but I don't really want to crop this anymore. So I'll just grab a healing tool, and in this case what we'll do is we'll make sure it's a decent enough size. So 180 will do us, and we'll just come down into the background image and just highlight there and just remove that. So we could even just click out some of the distraction up there. Now another really cool way of adding a vignette is something I like to do. What we need to do is choose the elliptical marquee tool, and what we need is a duplicate of this background. So what we can do is we can drop that down into here, so we have the duplicate, and then draw in the circle like so. Alright, and now what we want to do is we want to go delete. Well, what I'll do first is I'll change the blending mode to multiply and then go delete. Now what it will do is we'll delete the inside of the inside the circle. Okay, we'll do that again. So make sure we have our mask selected. I'm going to just move that up to about there, and we delete that. So that gives us our marquee. And then what we can do is just go Control D to delete, and then bring the opacity down to a level that we don't, so it sort of feathers it in a bit. So there's a subtle vignette on our photo. Okay, so the remainder is then just doing a bit of work on our bottom image. So we could do a bit of work there on the exposure, and really get that looking pretty grungy, like so. And just a little bit of work on, I would actually use a brush for this. So I'll use the sponge tool, and what we'll do is we'll have it saturate, and just put splashes of saturation in different spots, but not too many. To give us a little bit, just a bit of color in there. But it's still pretty grungy. So it's none of this is very over the top. It's quite subtle, but it's just grunged up. There's the hints of the rain in there. There's the wetter looking door now, which is got a bit of shine to it, a real lot of grunge to it, and it's definitely a change from the photo that we began with. So what I'll do is I'll just put up a contrast so that you can see the two photos side by side, and play around yourselves with this sort of technique to just add drama to your photos and really come up with something looking quite different to what you began with. And yeah, just have a lot of fun. Okay, so that's all for today. Have a look. I'll show you the comparison, and until next time, I'll catch you later.